diving a little deeper into the function, I'm going to take off our snail, hour wheel, and our minute wheel and pinion. I'm also going to take off the verge and the crutch piece off the back of the movement. I like to do that as soon as possible when I'm working on these so I don't damage anything by accident. So I want to let down the power on our mainspring and make sure our time train is not going to run when I take this piece off here. Good. That'll allow me to move our center wheel a little easier when I show you this. Now you'll notice when I'm working on things, I'm going to be putting items in little bins. A helpful solution to organizing things is you take a clock movement apart. I like to put each gear train in one bin and all my chime mechanism parts in another bin, and so forth. Helps keep it organized. Another good thing to do would be, if you're new at this, to take photos as you go. If you're able to do that, put them on your cell phone or smartphone to maybe make a chart that you can lay these parts out on. That has marks for each part and names. However you decide to do that, until you get familiar with everything, might be a good idea. So I'm going to take this off here quickly. When I pull them E-clips off, I like to use the small screwdriver. Something I got used to using for taking those off. They do make a E-clip removal tool, which I have never used, but the main goal is to get these off, these E-clips off, without marking up anything else, putting scratch marks on stuff, or having these little things fly around your shop. Guaranteed they'll fall under the bench, under the very center of the bench, and you'll be looking for it. Can be rather time consuming, trust me. So we'll pull this E-clip off and set that aside. These Hermle movements usually have two of the bigger style E-clips, one here over the minute wheel and one up here holding our auto correction hook and our long lever, chime locking lever. Set those aside. This retaining washer, it's good to note which direction this goes because it's been stamped and it has a smooth rounded edge here on one side and then a dip in here on the other side. These will go with the smooth edge down so that if our hour wheel moves out a little bit and hits that, it's got a smooth surface and won't get caught on the edge of that. That's good to note. And take this. This is our cannon. Right here, hour wheel cannon, and then our snail, which is attached to this. Our minute wheel and pinion. As I go, I like to check teeth and pinions, leaves, different things on our snail or our cams. I'll test them with my tweezers to make sure there's no burrs or anything like that, make sure everything looks right. good habit to get into. Now if I call out a name of something and it's not exactly right, Bob's going to take care of me and put up a balloon on the screen with the proper name. Can get confusing. I'm going to be focusing, so I might call something the wrong name or not be exactly right. With Bob's help, we'll get it all correct. Now, this is the center cam. It has 4 lobes. One is going to be longer than the other. Now that longer lobe plays an important function in our auto correction. So you can see I can easily turn this now with our verge off of there. Okay, now I'm putting the movement into warning and it's going to run. So let's see. I'm going to leave the rack on for now. Let that finish running. Now I can see already that this is out of sequence. Oop, and it continues to run because I've got it tipped funny here. Gravity needs to pull some of them levers down. Okay, I'm going to help our rack back up. Okay, well, we're out of sequence. So as we were looking at before, as our time turns, as our time advances here on our hands and that, it turns this center cam. As this center cam turns, it lifts this lifting piece right here. Now this little piece is pivoted up here and comes over to this lever, which has a detent on it, which you can't quite see yet, that lifts our levers. You see when I push on that, it starts to lift our lever. Right here, our chime locking lever.
This is the detent that William is referring to. Let me swing that out a little so you can see it a little better. And all it is a tab that reaches out and under the chime locking lever, or long lever as it's sometimes called. And it does the actual lifting of this lever to activate the warn sequence and also the auto correction sequence. Let me bring that back and you can take a look at it working. I've removed the other components just to make it simpler to see.
So time advances, it starts to lift our lifting piece, lifting lever. Starts to lift our chime locking lever. It gets far enough, we can see all this. Yeah. When it gets far enough, it puts our movement into warning. Now, noticing our chime locking cam, when it goes into warning, it advances a little bit here so that when these levers are dropped, it won't lock again. It'll ride on the higher part of our cam and allow it to run.
Okay, as I scroll this manually in a moment, you'll see the lifting lever right along the lobe of the center cam. And as the lever lifts, the chime locking lever, it will unlock the locking disc. And you'll see the disc move when it goes into warn, about 10 degrees counterclockwise here. And as William explains, that's so that when the locking lever drops back down, it will ride on the top of the locking disc surface. Let's take a look at that right now. Okay, you see it riding along. And right there it releases the chime train and allows the locking disc wheel between the plates to turn. And you see it move ahead while it's still on the top of the lobe. It's moved ahead about 10 degrees. Now when it drops off of this lobe, it will allow the long lever or chime locking lever to drop down onto the disc. And then right after that, it can now ride along the surface of that disc for the chime.
We advance in time a little more. It drops the lifting piece, allows our movement to run. Now, as our notch on our control cam follower pin falls into that notch, okay, when that falls into the notch, it allows the hook on this lever to capture our locking cam.
To show the locking and unlocking of the chime train, I need to bring the control cam into the scene so that we can now get a different perspective on what William is talking about. This pin follows along the surface of our control cam right here. I'll manually run it through the animation so you can see what's happening here. You can see as the lifting lever rides along the lobe, it unlocks the chime mechanism right here by releasing the locking disc. And it's going into Warn. And the hook can now drop down and ride on the surface of the locking disc. Now note that the pin, the cam follower more or less, is following now along this surface. This is the third quarter. And this is going to keep it from dropping down and locking the locking disc. But now, the slot that William's talking about, the pin can drop down into the slot, and which will allow it's now riding on the disc surface, and then it will allow it to drop down into the slot and lock the chime mechanism again. And now it's waiting for the fourth quarter. Now let's run the animation through the third quarter. Now, what's been shown up to this point will work well for initiating and carrying out the chiming sequence of a clock. That's to say that these components and their interaction with one another that we just covered in the animation is enough to chime all four quarters as well as activate the strike at the hour via the long lever here, which will be explained later. But the important point I want to make here is that this mechanism as it stands is complete in itself and more than sufficient to carry out the chiming in a clock. In fact, similar designs have been used for years for just this purpose. So we could stop here and we would have a chiming clock. But if for any reason the chime falls out of sequence with the time indicated by the hands, for example, the minute hand points to 45 minutes after the hour, but the clock chimes 30 minutes after, then we'll need to manually bring the chime back into agreement with the actual time indicated by the minute hand. Now, for clockmaker, that's no big deal. But for the owner of a clock that doesn't understand how this works, well, to use a modern but fitting phrase, that may not be too user-friendly. Who knows what might happen. So For this very reason, some brilliant clockmaker from our horological past came up with the auto-correcting mechanism and made life a lot easier for many clock owners. So next, William's going to begin introducing and covering the auto-correction components and explaining how they work together to bring a chime that's fallen out of step with the minute hand back into sequence. And I'll jump in with some supporting animations where we feel they'll be helpful.
Okay. After our third quarter, we've locked our chime locking lever, but we've also dropped our auto correction hook. Now if I pull that up and out of the way, you'll see that it also has this little piece here, which is our auto correction cam follower. Now our auto correction cam follower drops into a lower area on the auto correction cam behind our control cam, and Bob will put up a good animation about what that looks like, how that functions.
Okay, we'll take a look at the auto correction cam that William just referred to, which is mounted on the back side of this control cam, and then I'll explain its role in conjunction with the other components involved in the entire auto correcting process. Now we'll gradually build the animation by bringing in one auto correction component at a time and cover the purpose of each part in the assembly. And then William will finish this section up by taking us through a real-time video demonstration of the complete auto correction system in action. Let's spin the control cam around and take a look at the auto correction cam now. This is it right here, and as you can see, it's firmly fastened to the back of the control cam. We'll understand the purpose of this cutout in a moment. Now we can bring the auto correction hook into the scene. We see how the correction hook is kept from falling by means of its cam follower riding along the surface of the auto correction cam here. As the entire control cam assembly turns, I'm going to turn it back to its original position and make the control cam transparent so we can observe how these two components interact and function. We can see here that the correction hook cam follower rides along the auto correction cam surface for most of the auto correction cam's rotation. The auto correction hook maintains an even level for most of its travel until it finally arrives at and can drop down into the cutout right here. Now let's see the role of the hook plays by bringing in the locking disc. Okay, I'm going to run the animation backwards a bit so we can work with it. That should do it right about there. Again, we'll see this cam follower riding along the surface of the correction cam, which will hold the correction hook up and in place, maintaining a small distance between the hook and the locking disc right here. Advancing, we still maintain this relationship between the two components until, as we saw earlier, the cam follower begins to move down into the lower portion of the correction cam here, permitting the correction hook to drop onto and right along the locking disc surface. Until the hook end of the correction hook drops down and into the path of the locking face on the disc, locking the entire chime train again. It's easy to see now that the timing between all of these components is critical. If the timing is even a tiny bit off, it may be enough for the chime to mess up. Setting up the chiming mechanism will be covered in detail in the assembly section later, but without a clear understanding of how these components interact with one another, timing would more or less be a guessing game.
So we've advanced just a little bit. So that is dropped in there. We need to now lift the auto correction hook up and out of the way.
Now, William is beginning to explain how the auto correction function is activated and how it can only be activated by the long lobe on the center cam. Now, you remember that this control cam follower pin rides along the profile of the control cam, but it also serves another important purpose, and that is it acts as the lifting pin for raising the correction hook up to unlock the locking disc. Now let's take a look.
If I advance over one of these shorter lobes, okay, we can see it lifting our chime locking lever. But it hasn't lifted our auto correction hook. Okay? And that'll happen on all of these three other lobes. And this is the auto correction. This is what takes place in auto correcting. Does not unlock the auto correction hook. Now we're advancing to our long lobe on our center cam, and you'll see, if you keep an eye up here, that we're going to start lifting our auto correction hook. Now that it's going to go higher, it's started to lift that hook. It's lifted the hook far enough to release the locking cam and put the movement into warning. Now that it's in warning, as soon as it drops off our long lobe, the movement will be allowed to function. Okay.
Okay, to end this section, we'll add an animation that can be studied covering the third and fourth quarter chime.